1944, he took $2 million of his family's money, a fortune at the time, and gave it to the people. But it wasn't just money. This was money born from the philosophy, the public be damned. He gave away his impregnable fortress, a sanctuary built to hide from the world, all of it bought with the money of tyrants, the legacy of the #1 corporate predator. Today, I'm not going to tell you what he did. I'm going to tell you why. What drove the heir to America's most ruthless empire to commit the most generous act in its history? Imagine building your perfect paradise for 23 years, and then a single telegram turns it into the most beautiful crypt in the world. Listen, that is the sound of innocence, the laughter of children peering into infinity through the eyepiece of a telescope, the quiet rustle of footsteps as families stroll across immaculate lawns. Today, this place is a public treasure, open to all, a temple of science and tranquility, soaring above the waters of Long Island. But this paradise was paid for by the original sin of American capitalism. Every blade of grass on this lawn, every stone in this wall, is steeped in a legacy of ruthless power. This estate, known as Eagle's Nest, was the personal kingdom of William Kissam Vanderbilt II, heir to the most powerful, the richest, and perhaps the most hated dynasty in American history. He was the great-grandson of a titan, Cornelius Commodore Vanderbilt, a man who saw the world as a battlefield and bent it to his will. The wealth upon which this house was built was not earned through honest labor. It was torn away, torn from the throats of competitors, from the pockets of shareholders, from the sweat and blood of thousands of nameless workers who laid the steel veins across the body of the nation. This was money born in the flames of monopoly, corporate wars, and an icy contempt for society. So how did it happen? How did this fortress of solitude, built with damned money as a refuge from the world, turn into one of its most beloved treasures? How did the selfish dream of a rebel who rejected his family's empire ultimately become its most enduring monument? The answer is not here, in these serene gardens, or in the delicate carvings of the Spanish arches. The answer is buried deeper. It is written in coal smoke and steel rails. It echoes in the shouts of stockbrokers and in the silence of broken strikers. To understand the redemption, we must first look upon the sin. To understand the man who built this escape, we must first understand the empire from which he fled. Our story begins not here, on this peaceful cliff, but a century earlier, in a world ruled by blood and steam. It all began not with thunder and lightning, but with the quiet jingle of coins. $100, a loan from his own mother in 1810 to buy an old ferry boat. This is the official legend, the American dream in its infancy. But in the hands of Cornelius Vanderbilt, this money did not become the seed of prosperity. It became the seed of a predator. His first arena was the water. Steamboats, those fire-breathing leviathans, were the key to controlling the arteries of commerce. Vanderbilt didn't just compete. He waged a war of annihilation. His main weapon was predatory pricing. He dropped his fares so low that no one could compete with him. He operated at a loss for weeks, for months, until his rivals went bankrupt. And as they bled out, he bought up their remains for pennies. He didn't build a business. He cleared the field. His philosophy was simple and terrifying. "To hell with the law," he thundered. "I have the power, don't I?" For him, laws, morality, public opinion were merely annoying obstacles on the path to absolute power. Upon reaching the age of 70, an age when others think of retirement, the Commodore made his most brilliant and brutal move. He sold his entire fleet and invested every cent in iron, in railroads, He foresaw that steel tracks would become the new circulatory system of America, and he wanted to be its heart. He seized control of the New York Central Railroad, gaining a monopoly on the main gateway to the financial capital of the world. This control was not paid for by stock market manipulation alone. It was paid for by poverty. In 1877, when the empire passed to his son, the country was rocked by the Great Railroad Strike. Workers, earning about $1 a day, demanded humane conditions. The response was rifles and bayonets. Troops fired into the crowds, protecting the Vanderbilts' property. Every dollar that settled in their safes was stained with soot and blood. The Commodore's son, William Henry, inherited not only the money, but also the philosophy. When a reporter asked him if he should run his business with the public good in mind, he uttered the phrase that became the epitaph for an entire era: the public be damned. And he proved it with his actions, doubling his father's fortune to $200 million in 8 years. This wasn't just capital. It was a concentration of power, human suffering, and absolute contempt for the world outside the family. The clenched fist of the dynasty. And this fist, heavy and cold, was destined by birthright to fall into the palm of his great-grandson, a boy who didn't want to fight, a boy who loved speed and the sea more than the jingle of gold. The world William Kissam Vanderbilt II was born into didn't smell of gasoline and sea salt. It smelled of mothballs and cold marble. It was the world of Fifth Avenue in Newport, where his family erected stone monsters disguised as French chateaus and Italian palazzos. Each of these houses wasn't a home, but a theater for displaying power, where the sole purpose was to outdo the neighbor in ostentatious luxury, gilded cages for people whose only job was to possess a fortune. But Willie K. was different. His blood didn't race from stock market reports, but from the roar of an engine. In 1900, he set a world speed record, pushing a car to 76 miles per hour. He felt alive not in stuffy drawing rooms, but at the helm of a yacht, gazing at the limitless horizon. He rejected the world of his parents, and he needed a world of his own. He found it on the North Shore of Long Island, not on the prestigious, formal South Shore, but here, on a wild, secluded, almost inaccessible cliff. He wasn't looking for comfort, but a fortress, a place where the whispers of society gossip could not reach. And for this fortress, he chose a weapon his family could not understand: Spanish Revival architecture. This wasn't just a choice of style. It was a manifesto. Instead of the cold symmetry of French palaces, asymmetrical lines, warm stucco, wrought iron, and red roof tiles. This was the architecture of a traveler, a scholar, an adventurer, a house that didn't scream about money, but whispered of stories brought back from distant lands. This was not a showcase. It was a workshop, not a ballroom, but a laboratory. And herein lies the finest irony. To erect the symbol of his rebellion, he turned to the court priests of his dynasty, the architectural firm of Warren and Wetmore, the very same people who had erected his family's main temple to railroad power in the heart of New York, Grand Central Terminal. He used the money squeezed from the steel empire and hired its chief architects to build, for himself on a secluded cliff, a monument to his departure from that empire. Eagle's Nest, from the very beginning, was more than just a building. It was a declaration of independence, written in the language of stone and beams. He built his fortress. But he failed to consider that the greatest threat would come not from the outside, but from within. Look at these terraces, cascading down to the water. It seems as if this house and this cliff are a single entity, born together in time immemorial. It seems as though the architect merely gently inscribed his dream onto a landscape that had been waiting for it for centuries. But this is an illusion paid for with titanic effort and nearly limitless money. The land Willie K. chose did not want this house. It resisted. This was not a compliant plot of land, ready to accept a foundation. It was a steep, unstable slope, loose glacial soil that crumbled underfoot and slid toward the sea after every downpour. It was an enemy. The construction of Eagle's Nest didn't begin with blueprints and elegant sketches. It began with a war against gravity, against erosion, against the very geology of Long Island. Vanderbilt's answer was not subtlety. It was brute force, embodied in concrete. Thousands upon thousands of tons of concrete were poured into the belly of this hill. Every bag of cement, every rod of steel rebar was bought with dividends from the empire he despised. Engineers created a complex system of retaining walls that, like giant bones, dug into the earth to hold it in place. This was not construction. This was terraforming in miniature. They didn't build on the slope. They carved steps into it for their god, creating artificial plateaus where his temple could stand. It was a battle for every vertical inch, for every square foot of space. The house doesn't simply stand on this cliff. It clings to it with a death grip. Its foundation is not a base. It is claws, sunk into the flesh of the earth. The architectural serenity we see today rests upon a monument of brutal engineering will, hidden from sight. He conquered the land. He forced the cliff to submit to his dream. The foundation was ready. But an empty foundation is not a home. It is merely a stage. And now it had to be filled with scenery, brought from all over the world. This house is deceptive. It pretends to be local, rooted in this cliff like an ancient oak. But its soul is that of an immigrant, assembled piece by piece from all over the world. Its construction wasn't just an architectural task. It was a global military operation, with Willie K.'s office as its headquarters and the entire planet as its battlefield. Imagine a map of the world, crisscrossed with supply routes, all converging on a single point, this hillside on Long Island. Here, in Philadelphia, in the fire and smoke of the great Samuel Yellen's workshops, these intricate wrought iron grills are born. Their journey here covers hundreds of miles by rail, the very same empire that created this fortune. And over here, under the scorching Spanish sun, thousands of clay roof tiles are fired in kilns using ancient techniques. Each one is a fragment of the old world that had to be carefully packed, delivered to a port, loaded onto a steamship, and sent across the Atlantic. From here, from a dismantled French castle, comes an antique 16th century fireplace, a stone that remembers kings and revolutions. It was bought out, sawn into pieces, and now it sails toward its new life in the sanctuary of an American aristocrat. Every hammer strike in Philadelphia, every chip on a Spanish stone, every inch of the journey across the ocean, all of it was paid for by checks bearing Vanderbilt's signature. It was a demonstration of the power that capital provides. The power not just to buy things, but to ignore the laws of geography. But the most ferocious battle was fought here, on the final mile. It was one thing to deliver these treasures to the port of New York. It was quite another to haul them, heavy and fragile, up the narrow temporary roads to the top of this steep hill. Every column, every beam, every crate of marble, each was its own battle. Horses slipped in the mud, men strained, conquering the height inch by inch. The pieces arrived. The house came together like a giant, unbelievably expensive mosaic. But those who built it soon realized they were working without a final sketch. Because this house wasn't being built according to a single plan. It was growing. Most great houses are born from a single vision. They are an architect's dream frozen in stone, realized in a single surge of construction. But Eagle's Nest was different. It wasn't built. It grew. It breathed and changed along with its master. For 26 years, this house was a living organism, constantly adding new wings, sprouting new limbs. Its architecture is not a symphony written by a single composer. It is a jazz improvisation that lasted for a quarter of a century. It all began in 1910 with a relatively modest mansion. 8 rooms, a bachelor's retreat, a place to rest from the hustle and bustle. But Willie K's passion could not be contained within these walls. His collections grew, his life changed, and the house changed with him. First came the addition to the east. His expeditions brought back hundreds, then thousands, of marine specimens. Shells, corals, fish preserved in formalin. They required space, and the house provided it, growing an entire wing that was not residential, but a museum. Every stone in this new wing was paid for by railroad dividends to house treasures harvested from the ocean. Then, in the Moroccan courtyard, the heart of the estate, a new need arose: music. Willie K commissioned a giant Aeolian organ, costing $80,000. 1,470 pipes were to fill his sanctuary with sound. And the architects once again altered the design, weaving this complex mechanism into the living fabric of the house. Life made its demands. A new wife arrived, and with her, the need for more personal space. The house dutifully expanded, adding bedrooms and living rooms. The car collection grew, and the estate responded by building spacious garages. This was not a chaotic pileup. Each new part was organically woven into the existing structure, adhering to the overall Spanish style. But in essence, Eagle's Nest was an architectural diary, written in stone. Each wing is a new chapter in the life of William Vanderbilt II. A chapter about his passions, his marriages, his obsessions. He didn't just live in this house. He sculpted it, as a sculptor molds clay, year after year, transforming it into a precise reflection of his soul. But while he was creating his personal paradise, the world beyond his gates was plunging into hell, and his secluded construction on a hilltop suddenly became an act of brazen defiance. In the early 30s of the last century, a hum hung over America. But it wasn't the hum of prosperity. It was the hum of despair. But here, on this cliff, a completely different music was playing. The banging of hammers, the screeching of saws, the shouts of workers. Here, at Eagle's Nest, construction wasn't just continuing. It was in full swing. And below, at the foot of this hill, in the cities and towns stretching across the country, a different reality reigned. The reality of the Great Depression. The quiet shuffling of feet in endless soup lines. The deafening silence of shuttered factories. The faces of people who had lost everything: jobs, savings, hope. Against this backdrop, every new stone laid in the estate's wall, every bag of cement hauled up the slope, was not just a building material. It was a slap in the face. A slap in the face to millions of starving people. Newspaper clippings from that time are filled with headlines about the millionaires' whims, about a feast in a time of plague. The construction of Eagle's Nest was no longer a private matter. It had become a public insult. The money that fueled this construction was old, unyielding, immune to market panics. It was the Commodore's money, forged in the crucible of ruthless competition. It was the legacy of a man whose son had proclaimed, the public be damned." And now, Half a century later, his great-grandson, without realizing it, was embodying that motto in stone. He wasn't waging war on society. He was simply demonstrating that the economic laws of that society did not apply to him, that the world of the Vanderbilts existed in a parallel universe where there was no stock market crash, no unemployment. He was building his ark, oblivious to the worldwide flood. And Eagle's Nest did not hide. It rose above the despair of the valley like an impregnable castle, proclaiming to everyone who could raise their eyes to it the unbreakable power of old capital. To a hungry America, it was a monument to arrogance, a fortress built to shut out suffering. But they didn't know what was hidden behind those walls. They didn't know that it wasn't just a fortress. It was a temple dedicated to the only deity its master worshipped. At first glance, these walls speak Spanish, the language of arches, red tiles, and cool inner courtyards. But if you listen closely, if you look closer, you'll understand that it's merely an accent. The true language of this house is the language of the ocean. Every element here is not a decoration. It is a sacred text, understood only by the initiated. And to read it, you must forget the land and think like the sea. Look at the main gates. They are not guarded by lions or eagles, symbols of earthly power. They are guarded by seahorses, forged from iron. Silent guardians, created in fire with money earned from terrestrial railroads. Every scroll of this metal is a share of New York Central, melted down into an ode to the aquatic element. Walk further, touch the walls. Here, on the bas-reliefs, fish swim across the plaster. The walls of this house don't just separate space, they remember the deep. In the living room, above the fireplace, where others would hang a portrait of a conquering ancestor, are real navigational instruments, a barometer, a chronometer, a compass, sacred relics for a captain mounted into the wall like icons in an altar. And this tower, rising above the estate, it's not just a bell tower, it is a lighthouse. Its light served as a guide for yachts sailing through the Sound. It declared to every ship in the night, this is not just the home of a landowner. This is the home of a man of the sea. Even the Moroccan courtyard, the very heart of the house, is not just an architectural whim. It is a sheltered harbor, a quiet port, where instead of the noise of a bazaar, there is the murmur of a fountain, reminiscent of a distant tide. Eagle's Nest is not a house by the sea. It is the sea, brought ashore and turned into architecture. This is not a confession. It is a sanctuary, built by a man who only felt at home where the land ends. He didn't just live in this house, he lived inside his obsession. But this hymn to the ocean, written in stone and iron, had one most ferocious critic, a person for whom the sea was merely an annoying obstacle between the balls of New York and the villas of Europe. His own mother. The strongest prison is not one built of stone and steel. It is the prison of others' expectations. And the chief warden in the life of William Vanderbilt II was his own mother, Alva. She was not simply a society lady. She was a general of the drawing rooms, the Empress of Fifth Avenue. For her, the architect of a dynasty, money was not for personal hobbies. Money was a weapon, an instrument for building alliances, for crushing rivals, for erecting monuments of power that would make the old aristocracy bow their heads. And she looked at her son, at his race cars, at his yachts, at his jars of preserved fish, and she didn't see passion. She saw waste. To her, his hobbies were an empty whim, a pointless waste of capital that could have been spent on a new, even more grandiose palace, on a more advantageous match for his children, on strengthening the family's status. Every dollar spent on gasoline for his race cars was, to her, a betrayal of the Commodore's legacy. Every starfish brought back from an expedition was a useless trinket, taking up space where a throne could stand. Their correspondence, polite and cold, was a battlefield. Behind her courteous lines hid an icy pressure, a constant, unspoken question. When will you stop playing and get down to serious business? And Eagle's Nest became his answer. This was not just a villa, it was his argument, carved in stone. He built it to prove to her and to the world that his passion was serious business. The wing built for his marine collections was not a warehouse, but a scientific institute. The library, filled with books on travel and biology, was his intellectual citadel. The entire house became his voice, declaring without words, "This is my empire. It is not made of rails and stocks, but of knowledge and discovery." It was a battle for his soul, a battle between dynastic duty and the right to one's own life. He used her own weapon, limitless money, to build a world she could neither understand nor forgive. He was building walls to protect himself from his mother's will. But he had no idea that the most devastating blow to his dream would be dealt not by her, but by the woman who shared his bed. In the world of the Vanderbilts, divorce wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was a financial cataclysm. In 1927, at the very height of the construction of Eagle's Nest, the perfect facade of Willie Kay's marriage to Virginia Fair cracked and collapsed. Virginia, nicknamed Birdie, was herself an heiress to a vast fortune, but she lived by the rules of high society. She demanded balls, receptions, attention. She was the queen of the very world her husband was so desperately trying to escape. His cliff was a prison to her, his collections, boring junk, his silent obsession, an insult. When their marriage fell apart, it wasn't a quiet separation. It was a public scandal. The society pages exploded with headlines. Every whisper in the drawing rooms of Newport and New York was about them, and this humiliation was followed by cold calculation. The division of assets and the alimony settlement were like the breakup of a corporation. Lawyers, appraisers, accountants, an entire army descended to divide the empire Willie Kay considered inviolable. It was a war where the battlefields were bank accounts and the weapons were lawsuits. And this war struck a blow to Eagle's Nest. The flow of money, which had seemed endless, suddenly dwindled. Construction, which had been carried out on a scale that knew no bounds, slowed to a near standstill. Workers were laid off, orders for materials canceled. A silence, broken only by the sound of the wind, fell upon the cliff. This scandal exposed a vulnerability no one had considered. It showed that even the limitless money of the Vanderbilts had its limits, that a personal crisis, passion, betrayal, could inflict damage comparable to a stock market crash. Willie Kay built a fortress to shield himself from the world, but he couldn't build a fortress to protect him from himself. His paradise was desecrated, his dream put on pause, and to resurrect it, he had to go back to the one place where he was the sole master: the sea. To understand Eagle's Nest, you can't just look at the land, you have to look at the water, because this estate had a second half, mobile and tireless, its twin soul, 264 feet long, made of steel and finished with teak. The yacht Alva. She was named after his domineering mother. Perhaps it was irony, perhaps a tribute, but while Alva, the mother, tried to keep him in one place, the Alva, the yacht, gave him freedom. This was not just a pleasure craft. It was an ark, a floating research center that fed the estate on the shore for decades. If Eagle's Nest was the treasure chest, the Alva was the ship that hunted for that treasure. On board, there weren't just luxurious cabins and dining saloons. There were laboratories, specimen tanks, taxidermy equipment. During his around-the-world voyages, far from family dramas and stock market reports, Willie K. transformed from a millionaire into an explorer. It was from the deck of the Alva that he sourced the exhibits that form the heart of the museum today. Rare shells from Polynesia, ethnographic artifacts from Africa, exotic fish from the Caribbean. Every object in Eagle's Nest holds not just scientific value, it holds the taste of salt wind and the memory of distant shores. It was on these voyages that the greatest hunt of his life took place. In the Pacific Ocean, he tracked and caught a giant whale shark, 32 feet of living power. Its mounted form, carefully transported halfway across the world, was to become the crown jewel of his collection, the central deity in his temple to the ocean. The estate on the shore and the yacht at sea were two parts of a single soul. Alva was his instrument for understanding the world. Eagle's Nest, the place to preserve that knowledge. One could not exist without the other. It was a perfect symbiosis of dream and reality. But while he roamed the oceans in search of wonders, what awaited him on land was not triumph, but a blow from fate. A blow so powerful, it nearly destroyed both the builder and his creation. 1933. The Great Depression still has the country in its death grip, but at Eagle's Nest, work is bustling once again. Willie K. has returned from his voyages, full of energy and new plans. He is ready to build again, ready to expand his paradise. And then, the news arrives. A short telegram, a road accident in South Carolina, a car crash. His only son and heir, William Kissam Vanderbilt III, is dead. In an instant, everything loses its meaning. The roar of an engine, which had been the music of life, becomes a funeral march. Speed, which had been a symbol of freedom, becomes a murder weapon. The dynasty he had rejected, but which his son was meant to continue, is broken. The enthusiasm that had fueled this construction for 23 years is extinguished like a candle flame. The hammers on the cliff fall silent. The blueprints are set aside. Willie K., the man who tamed the cliff and crossed the oceans, is broken. Construction grinds to a halt, but he finds the strength to add one last wing to his home. But this wing is not built for life. It is built for memory. It becomes a memorial, a mausoleum dedicated to his lost son. The rooms are filled not with new collections from distant lands, but with the things the boy left behind. His hunting trophies, his guns, his photographs. Each object, a fragment of a shattered life, a relic of an irreplaceable loss. Eagle's Nest, conceived as a temple to the ocean and a monument to personal passion, is now overshadowed by the greatest of tragedies. Its corridors, which should have rung with tales of adventure, now hold the deafening silence of grief. The dream of a paradise on earth had turned into the creation of the world's most beautiful crypt, and the master of this crypt would live in it for another 11 years, surrounded by the ghosts of his extinguished dynasty. And so, it was finished. A temple, a fortress, a mausoleum. And now, within its walls, a double life began, one worthy of the pen of a great novelist. By night, these walls heard the clinking of crystal glasses and whispers in 3 languages. Eagle's Nest would put on its best mask, transforming into a stage for the chosen few. Here, to this secluded nest, came those who ruled the world or captured its imagination. The Duke and Duchess of Windsor, exiled monarchs, found temporary refuge here. Charles Lindbergh, conqueror of the Atlantic, discussed the sky and the sea with his host. Hollywood stars brought their glamour to this cliff, dining beneath Spanish arches and gazing at the lights of the distant shore. In his private movie theater, Willie Kay showed them not only the latest releases, but also his own films, shot during his expeditions. It was a subtle, elegant demonstration. You rule the world of men, and I rule the world of discovery. This was the stage where he could finally be not just an heir, but the protagonist of his own story. But when the last car crunched away on the gravel drive, the house would drop its mask. The lights in the formal halls went out, and Eagle's Nest became itself again. A laboratory, a monastery. It was then that its master's true life began. For hours, late into the night, he would sit with his curator in the silence of his study or the museum halls. Before them lay his true empire. 17,000 marine specimens. Each one had to be described, classified, catalogued. Every shell, every fish preserved in alcohol was more important to him than any guest who had left his house an hour before. He was the host of a glittering party, but in his soul, he remained a hermit. He built the stage, but preferred to work behind the scenes. He entertained kings, but felt true reverence before the silent perfection of nature. So what was this house? A happy sanctuary where he could finally be himself? Or the world's most beautiful and lonely golden cage, which he had built with his own hands? He had created his perfect world, protected from everything, but he could not protect it from one enemy: time. He was growing old, and he saw the bulldozers closing in on his family's legacy, turning the palaces of his fathers and grandfathers into dust and rubble. He understood that his eagle's nest awaited the same fate. And then, in the silence of his study, he made his final, most brilliant move. A move that would change everything. 1944. The world is convulsed in the agony of war, but here, at Eagle's Nest, a different battle is being waged, a battle against time and oblivion. William Vanderbilt II is old, and he is sick. He sits in his study, surrounded by the treasures he has collected his entire life, and reads the newspapers. And what he sees on those pages frightens him more than any illness. He sees photographs of how his family's legacy, once seemingly eternal, is being erased from the face of the earth. The giant mansions on Fifth Avenue, stone titans that were meant to stand forever, are falling under the blows of wrecking balls. His father's petit chateau, sold and demolished. The palaces of his uncles turned to rubble to make way for faceless high-rises. He understands the cold, brutal truth. The Vanderbilt money can no longer protect their creations. The era is over. He looks at the walls of his home, at every detail he so lovingly created, and he sees the future. Bulldozers grinding over his Spanish tiles, auctioneers selling off his collections piece by piece. His personal paradise, his fortress, his temple, is doomed. And in that moment, faced with the inevitability of the end, he makes a decision that goes against the entire philosophy of his dynasty. A decision his great-grandfather, the Commodore, would have considered madness, and his mother, Alva, a betrayal. He takes a pen and writes his will, and the lines, written by his weakening hand, become the strongest foundation this house has ever had. He does not leave his estate to distant relatives. He does not bequeath it to a private foundation. He gives it away, gives it to the people. He wills Eagle's Nest, every stone, every seashell, every patch of land, to Suffolk County, and with it, an endowment, a $2 million trust fund for its maintenance, with one single, unbreakable condition: his home, his personal sanctuary, must forever become a public museum for the diffusion of knowledge and education among the people. The grandson of the man who proclaimed, "The public be damned," gave that very public the most precious thing he had. It was not an act of generosity. It was an act of ingenious self-preservation. He realized that the only way to save his selfish creation was to make it the property of all. He gave away his paradise to make it immortal. The Vanderbilt empire crumbled to dust. Their great houses, those stone declarations of omnipotence, fell one by one. The Petit Chateau on Fifth Avenue, the Breakers in Newport, dozens of others. Monuments to capital that proved too expensive even for their creators. Ghosts of the Gilded Age, swept away by bulldozers and tax bills. But this house stands. It survived. Here, on this cliff, Eagle's Nest continues to breathe. Today, its corridors are filled not with the whispers of aristocrats, but with the buzz of children's voices. Its treasures are accessible not to a select few, but to anyone who buys a ticket. Why this one? Why did this sanctuary, this whim, this personal caprice survive where entire palaces fell? It survived not because it was the biggest, not because it was the most expensive. It survived because its creator, at the last moment, understood the fundamental law of legacy. Monuments built only for oneself are doomed to oblivion. Only what you give to others becomes eternal. William Kissam Vanderbilt II found a way to forge selfish passion into a public legacy. He took the money forged by his tyrant great-grandfather, money born from the philosophy, "The public be damned," and built his personal paradise upon it. And then, with a single stroke of a pen, he returned that paradise to the very public his ancestors had told to be damned. He, without realizing it, settled his dynasty's accounts. And that is why Eagle's Nest is more than just a house. It is redemption in stone. It is proof that beauty, when gifted to the world, can ultimately cleanse its dubious source. This is not a monument to the Vanderbilt money. It is a monument to the man who found a way to spend it so that it could never be forgotten. The story of Eagle's Nest is a story of great alchemy. It's about how a fortress, built by a rebel with the money of tyrants to shut himself off from the world, ultimately became his most generous gift to that world. It is proof that sometimes the most enduring monument is not built of stone, but from an act of self-denial. Can beauty, gifted to all, atone for the sins committed by the few for its sake? Or will the shadow of the Commodore forever remain within these walls, a reminder that every paradise has its own hidden price? The answer to this question isn't carved in stone. It is born in dialogue. Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story made you think, please support our channel. Your subscription and your like allow us to continue telling the stories of the great paradoxes from which our history is woven.